When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's 5-star Kieran Maguire. Let's get it out of the way first of all, Kieran. We have to mention this. We had a lovely time at Liverpool University last night, and thank you to everybody who came along and chatted to us after. But thank you in particular, Kieran, to your colleague who introduced us. He missed a chance. He could have said A-star Kevin Day and then 5-star Kieran, but it turns out, Kieran, that you have record approval ratings from your students, Kieran, which is lovely to hear. You looked a bit abashed last night, Kieran, and you look a bit abashed now, but I'm very proud of your behalf. So you're a national treasure in the last pod, and just for this pod, you're going to be 5-star Maguire, like an old-time Western sheriff.
I think I need taking down a peg or two.
The Baroness was very pleased to hear you described as 5-star Maguire. Also, I have to say, Kieran, I learnt more about your blinking flat in a 5-minute conversation with the Baroness at the hotel than I've learnt from you in 3 months.
It's got a telly. It's got a bed. What more do you need to know?
I really would like to thank everybody who made us so welcome last night. And I'd like to thank our 2 guests, Tom Behan from Castor, who was fascinating, and Alan Myers from Sky, whose stories about meeting the Queen through football at Blackburn were just fantastic. Unfortunately, we ran out of time before he got to tell us his Mick Hucknall, President Gorbachev story, which sounded just as good. Shall we move on to the news, Kieran? There's a lot of news today, and we've had to pick and choose the news to an extent. The Premier League will, of course, be mentioned. It was mentioned a lot last night, I have to say.
Its ears might have been burning.
The Premier League's ear. If the Premier League has ears, then their ears were burning last night. So very many of the questions we got from your students were about the Premier League. But just below, Championship clubs, Kieran, have had an important vote this week.
Yes, there's been a meeting of chief executives. As people may be aware, in the Championship clubs, in recent years have been allowed to lose £39 million over 3 years. Now, that contrasts with the Premier League, where you're allowed to lose 105. And one of the questions we were asked last night was, are we in danger of creating a mini Super League? Because you're very proud of Palace being in the Premier League now for 12, 13 seasons. Brighton have been there for 8. We appear to be sort of creating we've got the big 6. I can't see Villa or Newcastle or West Ham going down. So we've got 9 there. We've got sort of Palace, Brighton, Bournemouth. Not Bournemouth, but perhaps Brentford have taken that to 12. Is there a danger of there being a middle class in the Premier League, which makes it very difficult for the clubs coming up to deal with. And that's why we saw in 23-24, the 3 promoted sides are immediately relegated, and the 3 clubs who were promoted last season were they're not relegated, of course, but they're occupying the 3 relegation spots at this point in time. That's not good for football. As much as neither of us want to see our sides relegated, the fact that they are comfortably above the relegation zone, I don't think it's necessarily good for football. It takes away some of the jeopardy. And one of the issues is football clubs being promoted from the Championship. In their first season in the Premier League, they're only allowed to lose £61 million because it counts as 1 year in the Premier League and 2 years in the Championship. So it looks as if the Championship clubs have acknowledged that inflation exists, which makes a lot of sense. And the allowable losses are going from £39 million to 41.5. So it's a small step, but it's acknowledging the fact that there are broader issues in terms of increasing prices, especially in an environment in which there's a lot of pressure coming from fans to clubs for the issue of ticket prices. We've seen Liverpool freeze their prices, which is to be applauded. We've seen West Ham do the same. Again, a lot of credit has to go to the West Ham fan groups who have been very active in their communication with the board at West Ham. It looks as if Arsenal have increased prices at the Emirates. And I was contacted by a Manchester United fan today who said, I've just been sent a letter, and it's sort of a letter which doesn't actually say anything. It's sort of... Are you thinking of renewing your season ticket? If so, we need to know. But how can you expect somebody to renew a season ticket if you're not prepared to give details of prices? Yeah. So all a little bit Machiavellian, all a little bit strange, but that does appear to be the new normal when it comes to the way that Ineos are running the club. So there is pressure from Aston Villa. I think they proposed for an increase in the Premier League's £105 million to become £135 million loss over 3 years. That was rejected a few months ago. I think the direction of travel is that the rules in their present form aren't working particularly well. Clubs are having to sell players in order to satisfy PSR. I don't think that's necessarily good. And we've got this gap. So that's the rules. There's been another quite important rule as far as the EFL clubs are concerned, and that relates to clubs in League One and League Two. Now, historically, there was something called Football Fortune, which said for every £100 that an owner put into a League One or a League Two club in the form of shares, you could spend an extra £100 on wages. And the reason why that's important is, as we saw at the start of 24-25, the new owners of Birmingham City, Knights Head, they put in, I can't remember the exact number, we are talking tens of millions, which effectively gave Birmingham City the equivalent of a blank cheque in terms of the cost of recruitment for this season and the wages that they're in a position to offer. That rule is being changed. And in League One, if the owner puts in £100, you can only spend 60 on wages, and if in League Two, it's dropped to £50. I think the first £500,000 is effectively exempt from that, but they are trying now to make rules to prevent clubs using, I think in the case of Birmingham City, and it's a fantastic story, Birmingham, this city. Every time you talk to a Blue Nose, they say they are giddy with excitement. That do we want trampolines if clubs drop from the Championship to League One, or do we want some sort of safety net? So there have been changes, and I think broadly these changes should be applauded as well, because it isn't necessarily good if you can buy yourself out of the lower two divisions by the owners putting money in. It's great that they are putting money in, but it should go not just on wages.
Can I just clarify something about the Championship that you explained there, Kieran? I just want to make sure I've got this right. So what you're saying is the 3 promoted clubs into the Premier League, for the first season, they have to partially abide by Championship financial rules?
They do, in the sense that because you assess PSR on a 3-year rolling period of time, in your first season in the Premier League, you say, well, you've been in the Premier League for 1 year, so you can lose 1/3 of 105 million, which is 35. But you've come from the Championship, or you've come from the EFL, so therefore we're going to allocate you 2/3 of the Championship's £39 million losses. So 2/3 of 39 is 26. You go 35 plus 26. This gives you £61 million. And if you look at the case of Nottingham Forest, when they were promoted 3 years ago, and they subsequently, of course, had a points deduction, it does seem really harsh. It's tough enough to get to the Premier League. It's damn hard staying in there in those first couple of seasons, as we've seen. And seen so many clubs fail. But to have one hand tied behind your back, in the sense that you're not allowed to lose as much money if you are newly promoted compared to the existing clubs, are these unintended consequences, or are these rules which have been set up by the existing Premier League clubs to genuinely try to make it as difficult as possible for the clubs that have just been promoted?
Well, it strikes me, Kieran, that our good friend Nick DeMarco has pulled a fast one here when it comes to Leicester City, because it seems like technically you can be in the Championship and the Premier League at the same time, which is
exactly, or in neither.
Or in neither, as it turns out. He argued Leicester were. It does seem, I hadn't really taken that information in, Kieran. It does seem slightly unfair that you're a fully fledged member of the Premier League and yet you still have to abide by the rules of the league you've just come from and may never go back to. It doesn't strike me as right. And normally I don't bother my pretty little head about things like this, Kieran, because I'll never sleep. But we discussed this story last night as well, Kieran, and as my women's football team, I'm firmly rooted to the bottom of the Women's Super League. I'm very interested in this radical plan that they've put forward.
Yes, this was a story that broke in The Guardian. It's been picked up by some other media outlets as well. At present, we've got two divisions in the women's professional game, the WSL and the Championship. There is a danger, I think, in the women's game of something similar to what we've just been discussing, i.e. the side which gets promoted doesn't have the resources to compete, gets a few bad results. It's quite difficult attracting fans to come to matches if you are regularly getting turned over. So one of the proposals is for the next 4 seasons, there's going to be promotion from the Championship, but no relegation from the WSL. So each year, the size of the WSL is going to increase by 1 team until we get to 16 teams. And then it's going to stop. And we're also going to grow the Championship to 16 teams as well. So effectively, we're going to have a women's professional game of 32 teams. I think this is an interesting development. I think there is a concern. If you take a look at the attendances of some WSL Championship clubs, we are talking in hundreds rather than thousands. Whereas at the top end of the WSL, we've seen Arsenal women's team get more than 50,000 this season, I think, when they played Spurs, and they are now playing a considerable number of their matches at I was about to say Highbury, but at the Emirates, of course. Yeah. And there's been a new record attendance this season. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. And I think because we are still in a development phase as far as the women's professional game is concerned, it is essential that those clubs which are getting into the WSL are given the opportunity to grow once they are there. If they're coming up with a relatively inexperienced squad in terms of the calibre of opposition, if they're coming up and They can't pay the wages because they're not getting the same level of attendances. They're in a very weak position, and there's a danger of it becoming a yo-yo situation where you get one club comes up, goes down, recovers for a season, goes back up again, and that's not good for the women's game. And I think when we're discussing this topic, one of our concerns was we are sort of you and I. We're hardy perennials. We've seen our sides get a severe defeat. Brighton lost 7-0 a few weeks ago. I thought I'd say it before you did, and that won't stop me from going, and it won't stop anybody who was there on the day going. I think if you're seeing a few of those defeats and you're a new fan of a WSL team, you might think this isn't a lot of fun, and it's also not fun for the players themselves if there's such a magnitude of difference of quality. So it's an interesting change. I think the WSL is trying to grow its fan base. It's trying to grow its broadcasting and commercial base as well, and to allocate more of that money to the clubs on sort of more of an even keel basis to allow the new clubs to be able to become genuinely challengers and develop their own identity and so on.
Which has to happen, but sadly, Kieran, we've spoken to senior figures in the women's game and to senior broadcasters of the women's game and supporters of the women's game who say that equality in the WSL is almost, it's too late. They've missed the opportunity to make women's football equal, and that we're in a similar situation in the women's game as you are in the men's game, in that only 3 teams probably will ever win the title in the next 2030s. Just I almost hesitate to say this, Kieran, because my grasp of maths is up there with Paddington Bear. But if the WSL are promoting one team at a time for 5 seasons, there's going to be 3 seasons where there's an odd number of teams in the league.
That's correct. Yes. So, but if you look at if you look at rugby union, we used to have the 5 nations and one international. I don't see this as being an issue, provided the fixture card is communicated. Then you say, well, for 2 weekends of the year, we've not got a game. Yeah, and you get along with that. We've both said that one of our issues with international fixtures is waking up on a Saturday or waking up at the weekend and not having a fixture. Yeah. It's part of the game, and also remember, it also applies to WSL clubs if one of them has qualified for the latter stages of the Women's FA Cup and so on.
Well, there is some good news in a way, Kieran, for women's football globally when it comes to equality, because it turns out that no one gives a toss about the Women's Club World Cup either.
That's right. FIFA have decided to postpone the 2026 FIFA Club World Cup until 2027. The reasons for this, in typical FIFA style, are a bit opaque. They don't seem to have a strategy, but I think the concerns that we expressed relating to the FIFA Men's Club World Cup probably apply here. The men's competition was rescued by an incredible amount of generosity by DAZN, agreeing to a broadcast deal. And a few weeks later, DAZN got a very large injection from a minority investor, which helped them. Which I'm sure that's just a major coincidence,
of course.
But that doesn't appear to be the case when it comes to the Women's Club World Cup, and there is an issue in terms of certainly the Women's Champions League is an attractive proposition, and that gets decent crowds, but it seems to be a bit mixed in some of the other federations, and FIFA, I think, have probably made the right decision. The FIFA Women's World Cup for Nations is a fantastic competition, but there doesn't appear to be interest and jeopardy as far as the club competition is concerned. And therefore, they've pushed it back at 1 year. watch this space as to whether it does actually take place.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast here to tell you about Michelob Ultra Courtside. It's getting fans closer to the NBA with a chance to win prizes like courtside seats, a trip to All-Star Weekend, and much more. Check it out at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access, Courtside 24-25 sweepstakes, no purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 and up. Begins on October 1st, 2024, ends July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
I'm going to let you finish the second part of this next sentence, Kieran. But the first part begins, the Premier League is ready to escalate its legal battle. And it strikes me that at this moment in time, terrible phrase, but at this moment in time, the last thing the Premier League needs is another hold my coat moment. Basically, the Premier League needs to sit in the car and refuse to be lured out into the car park of Tesco for a tear-up with anyone, because they're losing them left, right, and centre, Kieran, basically. But no, it seems they're squaring off with somebody else.
Yes, Richard Masters was talking at the Financial Times Business of Football Summit, which took place in London last week, and by all accounts, it was very good. Our hero, Swiss Ramble, I think he was there as well. He was giving all of the panels and so on. Todd Bowley was saying that the Premier League should be looking for a single international broadcast partner, effectively saying, go with Netflix. And I thought that was quite intriguing. At present, the Premier League has deals with domestic broadcasters in all of these different countries, and that's negotiated on a country-by-country basis. Todd Bowley seems to think that if you had one entity selling or broadcasting all of the Premier League rights internationally, that would make even more money. I'm not so certain about that, and we wait to see on that. But Richard Masters was asked about a range of issues, and he was Richard is a good guy. People think we don't like the Premier League, but Richard Masters is a good guy and has a really tough gig, if you ask me. But it looks as if the squad control rules, which were possibly going to be introduced for the 25-26 season, but have now been pushed back, are going to be operating in the background as a sort of as a shadow set of rules. And the PFA are not happy about that. They see this as a backdoor attempt to have a wage cap introduced into football. And at present, there's not a collective bargaining agreement, but there is a separate entity where the Premier League and the PFA get round the table. And Richard Masters came out with a few statements which appeared to indicate, bring it on, we'll take you on, i.e. Premier League clubs, if they decide to introduce a rule, the players have to accept it. Now, remember, we do now have a situation in which there's an awful lot of American owners in the Premier League, and many of those American owners are also owners of American franchise sports organizations where player owner disputes have been unusually common. And you hear about strikes and you hear about lockouts and so on. So it could be that the scene, as far as the Premier League is concerned, is we want to be more combative towards players. And we quite like the idea of players having a lower proportion of the revenues of the game, which of course means more profits for clubs and more money for the billionaire owners. So that's that appeared to be sort of some of the flavour of Richard was saying. And he then came out with a statement which I think in hindsight doesn't look very wise. And it was along the lines of, and by the way, effectively, the PFA needs to remember that the Premier League is one of the biggest funders of the PFA, and that money which we're supplying to the PFA, that's sort of voluntary. We do that as part of our funding for the greater good of the game and grassroots and so on. And that did make me slightly twitchy, because as far as I can make out, the reason why football fans go to football matches is to watch the players, not the owners and not the executives. So if you're now sort of, I'm not saying making veiled threats, but just reminding the PFA where the vast majority of its money comes from, I'm not sure that is a good thing to do, because it's only going to put the back up of the organisation. Footballers are not a militant organisation. The players are. They want to play football, but I think there is a sense of a collective, and I think it's not necessarily a wise thing for the Premier League to being so combative. I'm as you know, I'm a great believer in what Nick DeMarco's always said: mediation, negotiation. Don't dictate, even if you do wield all the power, and that doesn't just go to the Premier League.
Well, those American owners, if that is their mindset, need reminding that the industrial relations landscape in this country is very different to how it is in America. And B, it might be worth reminding, if that is Richard Masters' mindset, that many of the PFA's members are Premier League superstars who could probably afford to sub the PFA through any legal action that might occur. And squaring up to Maheta Malonga, it strikes me as not a particularly intelligent thing to do at this stage of the game. Talking to the Premier League, Kieran, and legal battles, several high-profile people in the game at Liverpool University last night were indicating that they thought there might be an outcome of the Man City case as early as this Friday, which you said you weren't that sure about.
Yes, I mean, I'm on quite a few WhatsApp groups, and I'm always a little bit circumspect as to when information is going to come out. I think certainly when the Manchester City hearing into the 130 charges, as we now know it to be the case, concluded, which was mid to late December, there was a consensus of opinion that there was a fair chance that we would be getting the results in spring. Right. Now we're into spring. We're recording this at 5:30, and the sun's out and the sky is blue, and we are making progress as far as the solstice is concerned. And on the back of that, when is this judgment going to take place? So, I mean, I've actually recorded with a broadcaster earlier today an interview on the basis of hearing things out, and again, without going into details, there have been quite a few media outlets who have been trying to pre-book. If it does happen, Kieran, how many hours can you give us on the story?
115.
The Baroness was not overjoyed, as you can imagine, when she heard these things. So I think there is a growing suspicion that perhaps we are moving to an announcement, and I think that can only be good for all concerned, because it creates uncertainty at so many levels within the game itself, and we do need clarity, and nobody knows what the outcome is going to be. But certainly there is a feeling that we're entering into the final straits as far as getting white smoke from Premier League towers. But I'm not necessarily convinced that this Friday is any better than any other day. Certainly, one of the things I did pick up from talking to some of our friends in the media, they seem to think that making the announcement on a Friday has some merit because it will be a big kerfuffle on the day, and then we've got a set of fixtures coming up this weekend, and people move on. Whereas if you announce it on a Monday, you've got 4 or 5 days of post-mortem into the intricacies and the granular analysis of the verdict. And I don't think, as a football fan, we really need to be sort of flogging a dead horse. Outcome comes out, whatever it is, you move on.
Sometimes you accuse yourself, Kieran, of being cheerily optimistic. I think you're being cheerily optimistic there, Kieran. I think if you imagine that as the Premier League often do, if they announce it at 5:30 on Friday afternoon, if you think people have stopped discussing it by Monday morning, if you think by Monday morning TalkSport will go, and that's Friday's news, Man City have been found guilty of all 115 charges, I think you're very cheerily optimistic in that one, Kieran. Also, more bad news for City, or good news for their lawyers, they're fighting on a foreign front now as well.
Yes, the head of La Liga, Javier Tebas, I think it's fair to say Javier likes a scrap. He's taken on an awful lot of organisations, including Real Madrid and Barcelona, and I think deserves a lot of credit for that. He is now filing a legal complaint to the European Union alleging that Manchester City have breached EU competition law and has likened them to Enron. Now, Enron was an American power company, energy company, and I think it's fair to say that Enron's finances were pretty creative. And again, I mentioned to the audience at the Liverpool University gig that I've read the book about Enron and I've seen the film of the book, and I still maintain this is the most interesting film I've ever seen about accounting. It's called The Smartest Guys in the Room. Admittedly, I don't think it's a very large pool of competitors for the most accounting. It's never really bothered me. You think about the number of films that you see about the law industry and courtroom cases. You never see that about VAT returns, do you? Or amortization. I think Hollywood's missed out on a trick there. I'm not quite ready to write the script for that one just yet.
Yeah, but we discussed this last night, Phil, Kieran, the dearth of account trading. Does Trading Places count as an accounting film?
Yeah, that's more sort of markets than accounting. You've not seen Trading Places, have you?
I have not seen Trading Places. No, you're quite right, Kieran. I haven't. But you know what I'm like. Don't tell me to watch it because that's the last.
Oh
thing,
no!
Last thing to do. I will not watch it if you tell me to watch it. No, it's hard to understand why Hollywood hasn't found accounting as a fascinating idea for filmmaking, but they'll run out of law scenarios in the end. They've only got guilty or not guilty, essentially.
That's true.
I'd love to see a film with. I'd love to see Matt Damon in Seasonally Adjusted. That'd be a cracking film, wouldn't it? Anyway, Manchester City. What have they done apart from being the Enron of football?
Well, this is the accusation which has come from Tebas that Manchester City have artificially inflated their revenues by disguising money from the owners. I have seen some very, very detailed documents which are not in the public domain relating to this, and that's quite intriguing content. I can't go into any details about it. It's not appropriate to do so, and also it would take up a few hours. But certainly there is a body of opinion still within European football about Manchester City. Tebas feels that they successfully defended their position on appeal at CAS on a technicality. But when I talk to lawyers, they say everybody that is found not guilty is done on a technicality. So if I get accused of killing somebody on a technicality that I didn't kill them, I can be found innocent. So he does appear to be at loggerheads with Manchester City and PSG, Paris Saint-Germain. That they came under his steely gaze. But it's noticeable that no such reference was made to Newcastle United, which is also connected to another country. And could that be because La Liga itself has a number of contracts based in Saudi Arabia?
Oh, see, you're being cynical, Kieran, and you don't like being cynical.
No, you're being cynical. I'm just...
Oh, no, you're right. On a technicality, you're right. I am being cynical.
Yeah, technicality.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, also, that takes the wind out of my sails for this next comment, because you have indicated in the past that Tebas has a problem with the Premier League full stop. Yes,
he thinks that the Premier League is the playground bully. He thinks that the Premier League is the cuckoo in the European football nest.
Nice.
And it's got too big for its boots. I'm racking these up in metaphor magic.
If I've taught you anything, Kieran, it's how to mix a metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the back of that, I think taking on certainly one of the Premier League clubs is something that he would like to do. Whether he has the financial resources to do so, in terms of this could be a very expensive legal action, I'm not so sure. But there's been a number of snarky comments from Tebas over the years. Perhaps the reason why the Premier League is able to sell its TV rights for more than La Liga is, for all of its faults, the Premier League is a genuinely more competitive competition than La Liga. And that extra degree of jeopardy does make it more attractive to international broadcasters who, as far as they're concerned, seem to think that there are very, very few clubs in Spain that they want to actually broadcast.
Well, yeah, the difference is as well, and we've spoken to broadcasters like this, is that, yes, you can accept that in England, as in France, well, not so much France, there's only one club that will win it, but in France, Spain and Italy, there are very few clubs that will ever win the title. But in England, there's more chance of an Ipswich beating an Arsenal than there is of a team at the bottom of the Spanish league beating Barcelona or Madrid, isn't there? So it's more competitive in that way, in a sense, isn't it? It
is, and that excitement, Manchester City have been magnificent in terms of their achievements in the last 4 years to do 4 in a row, but for a couple of those years they were hanging on. It was going to the final wire. And that, again, is attractive from a broadcaster's point of view, which you're not necessarily getting in some of the other European leagues.
Yeah, and in France, Kieran, the president of Marseille, is going to be having... Oh, he's got a very sore wrist. He's had the biggest of slaps, hasn't he?
He has. So this is Pablo Longoria, who is Marseille's president. Now, Marseille as a club is it's a port club. It's got quite a feisty fan base, as we found last season when Brighton went to play there in the Europa League. But I think there's a creeping observation from an awful lot of people in football, mainly fans, but we're now seeing it being taken up by some owners and some other high-ranking individuals, that football is corrupt. Now, the word corrupt, for me, is a very, very significant accusation. And if you're going to make accusations of that severity, then you've got to be able to back it up. So Marseille lost 3-0. He's saying it's the referees. They're being chosen because they've got a vendetta. They're corrupt. They're trying to make sure that Marseille are not going to be successful. There isn't evidence to support that. As we have had discussions off air and with players from this country who have gone on to be managers elsewhere, but there's certainly one country that I'm aware of where you don't need to be Mystic Meg to work out what the result is going to be before the match takes place. But there's no evidence to support that in French football, and there's no evidence of that at all in English football. Referees make errors. Sometimes referees make pretty bad errors, but they don't cheat. Players cheat. So the French football authorities have given him a 15-game ban for alleging corruption within the game. And I think that's an appropriate thing to do. If there's too many people just shouting things out without having the evidence to back them up. And as an academic, I try to make sure that what we cover on the show and what I do as a professional is backed up with a reasonable degree of evidence, because you want to have some authenticity and credibility when you make these statements.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pop, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
Now, Kieran, I was very interested to hear from Alan Myers in Liverpool this week, who's been covering football in the Northwest for Sky for some time, that when he interviewed John Textor, when John Textor was hoping to take over from Everton, Alan Myers found him to be a very creditable, very interesting, very knowledgeable football chap. Now, his takeover of Everton didn't happen, but it looks like John Textor is being joined in his Eagle Football Holdings group by another high-profile Northwest football person.
That's right. I mean, Eagle Football Holdings is trying to get a listing on a stock exchange. And in order to do that, you've got to persuade the stock exchange that you have sufficient experience, sufficient knowledge, and sufficient gravitas within the industry. So John Textor, by all accounts, has been in contact with Ed Woodward, the former chief executive of Manchester United, who is always connected, I think, with the Glazer family and the acquisition, because he was working at the bank, who were the advisors. Whether he was involved in that, we don't know. And he's not been involved in football now, I think, for 3 to 4 years. He was replaced by Richard Arnold. So he has been now rumoured to be part of the executive team at Eagle Football Holdings. And I was looking at Botafogo. Is that
Botafogo? Yeah,
Botafogo. I think John Textor's stock at Botafogo is volatile. Which is quite ironic that Mr. Textor himself seems to have quite a volatile approach to his observations. But it was intriguing to listen to Alan Myers and to hear Alan talk about A, John's passion for the game, and B, his knowledge, which appeared to go far beyond that of many of the owners with whom we hope to be appropriate custodians of the clubs that we support. Why John Textor didn't acquire Everton was down to reasons which, again, we can't go into any detail on the show, but I think he was a bit frustrated. But I always felt, in order to be able to acquire Everton Football Club, he must have been able to find a willing buyer for his shares in Crystal Palace, which he's failed to do for quite a considerable period of time. And he's very much out on limbo at present, having courted another Premier League club and made eyes at that club, and now his relationship with Palace seems to be one of arm's length.
Sorry, Kieran, this is going to sound like a very silly question, but when you say John Textor's stock is volatile, do you mean his actual holding or his reputation is volatile?
Well, his reputation, I think, amongst the fans of Botafogo, I think sort of 10 months ago, he was being lauded. But as we know in football, a couple of weeks is a long time. And results of Botafogo recently have not been as good as the fan base has wanted. And like many fan groups, they vent their opinions quite vociferously.
For the most part, Kieran, as we learnt again in Liverpool this week, the takeover of Everton by the Friedkin Group seems to have been met with applause by most people, but there may be one or two minority shareholders in Everton who would disagree.
Yes, this is a story which we've seen run in the Times on a couple of occasions. When the Friedkin Group came in to acquire Farhad Moshiri's shares, they also effectively took over some of his loans, and those loans have been converted into shares as well. So let's say originally Everton had 1,000 shares and the minority shareholders owned 50 of them. So they had 5%. What's happened is that the number of shares in issue as a result of the takeover has gone from, say, 1,000 to 5,000. They've still got 50 shares, and their 5% has become 0.5% of the club. And if you own 0.5% of Everton instead of 5%, it means that the value of your investment decreases. So I know a few Everton shareholders, and they say, look, we don't buy shares in Everton for monetary gain. We do it because it's our club and we love our club. And this is another way of demonstrating that love and that commitment to the club itself. There was a story run in the Times that the Friedkin Group has not been in contact with the minority shareholders who have seen the value of their shares decrease. Because if you flood the number of shares, then any shares that you originally held are going to fall in value. I think that's upset some of the minority shareholders. Equally, I did see a tweet from the Everton shareholders group saying, well, actually, there has been, we're not saying there's been no communication. I don't think necessarily they like the outcome of some of that communication. But this was always a concern for me, because an individual Everton share was worth quite a lot of money, but it wasn't being traded on the market. So therefore, it could be 3, 4, 6 months before somebody sold a share. So what is the fair value of a share in Everton at a time when, before the Friedkin Group came in, there was a chance? I wouldn't say it was a high chance, but there was a chance of the club going into administration, under which circumstances the shares would have been worth zero or close to zero. So I think it's one of these things where getting people around the table and trying to resolve it so that Evertonians can come out of this with a feeling that they're not being taken advantage of by the Friedkin Group, and the Friedkin Group can say, well, we're going to make perhaps a fair offer to these shareholders. There's a case for saying that having the Friedkin Group own 100% as opposed to 96% has some merits. I'm aware of other clubs in the Premier League where you do have a minority shareholding who only own a small proportion of the club, and they do feel somewhat not disrespected, but they feel that their voices aren't being heard.
I think you've answered my first question there, Kieran. So it's 4%. The number of shares held by outside the Friedkin Group is 4%. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, and I think that's decreased following the takeover because loans have effectively been converted into shares.
Right. I don't know how it works in other businesses, Kieran, but just from a PR angle, would you not have expected the Friedkin Group to say, let's have a meeting with some of the minority shareholders? We know that they're mainly fans. These are not people that will be influencing the way the club is ever run, but it'll only take an hour. It looks better in the local papers, does it not?
It's also the right thing to do.
Yeah.
If somebody's taking over my company and I'm left with a bit, then keeping people on board, because these are the people that have fought for the club over the years. These are the people who have made a significant contribution into making Everton one of the blue chip clubs in English football, and just common courtesy as far as I'm concerned.
Got shown a lot of photos of the new stadium in Liverpool, Kieran. Wow, a lot of people queuing up to show us photos. It looks incredible. Steep, though. It looks steep. Yeah. It's incredible. Now, a penultimate story, Kieran. A lot of clubs have published their latest annual accounts this past week, and we spend a lot of time going through various clubs. I don't really want to go through each club. It's easy enough to find their figures out, and I'm sure if anything comes out, we can talk about it in the next couple of weeks. But why don't we just pick one, unusually, from leafy southwest London in Tier 6 of English football rather than the Premier League suspects?
I think that's a very good idea, and therefore we're going to choose Hampton and Richmond Borough.
Right.
And have the word borough for Richmond and Hampton. Yeah, it does seem somewhat inconsistent. But the rather alarming thing, you say the sixth tier of English football, they lost £1.1 million in a year. And that's £20,000 a week. And those losses are going to have to be funded from somewhere. But it does show, and clearly we do have friends in non-league football. And they say it's becoming an increasingly expensive business. And remember, you don't have the TV deals that you have in the EFL. Even in League Two, you're probably picking up the thick end of 1.2, 1.3 million pounds in a single season from both solidarity payments and the EFL TV deal. So you drop down two tiers from that, and the money from the TV deal is measured in buttons. If you've got a new owner who's come in and has tried to splash the cash, and this again is an issue which I'm always slightly twitchy about, you can buy your way out of the non-league area to a certain extent. It is competitive. It's probably cost you £4 or £5 million to buy your way out of the National League. But here in Hampton, it's a lot of money spent, and by all accounts, it didn't move the dial in terms of what was happening on the pitch. So money not well spent.
This last story, Kieran, I have to say, made me genuinely sad, involving, as it does, what appears to be a very decent club and one of the nicest people I've ever met. Yes,
this is a formal announcement on Companies House, which came through. I think I just got back from the gig. So it was. I got back about midnight, and
I'm glad you
said, "What are you doing now?" And I'm saying, "Well, got to check out Companies House." And I've got a huge affection for Delia Smith, because I remember going to university with one suitcase full of T-shirts, football kit, and Delia Smith's cookbook, because my mum was worried about me, as all Irish mothers are, of course, trying to survive. And I owe it to Delia Smith that she prevented me from eating pot noodle for 3 years. And in those days, there were only two flavours of pot noodle: beef and tomato and spicy. And so I learnt to cook thanks to Delia. So I'm always in her debt for that. And her affection for Norwich City Football Club is well known, and I think is encapsulated in one particular halftime moment, which will go down as part of football folklore. But yes, she has handed across majority control to Marco Andanaccio, and it came through on Companies House that she no longer has influence at the club, i.e. her shares have been passed on. And I think I'd just like to say, on behalf of all football fans of a certain age, thanks for everything you've done for your local team, because you're from a different generation and a different dynamic as far as football ownership was concerned.
Yeah. First of all, Kieran, I was very rude to interrupt you there, Kieran, because it just made me laugh. The fact that you said you came home from the gig last night. I like the fact that you called it a gig. This is great. It sounds a bit more rock and roll than it actually was. It was a fantastic night. But, secondly, if you don't know what Kieran's talking about, the half-time, if you just Google Delia Smith, where are you? Then you'll discover it's one of the most astonishing things you'll ever see when the owner of a club comes out with a microphone in her hand to chastise her fans. It's incredible. But also, as you mentioned, a different generation, Kieran, when Delia first took over Norwich, or took part control of Norwich, would have been 20, 30 years ago, she would have been considered a very wealthy individual. And now she's discovered she's nowhere in the term. She's still a very wealthy woman, and rightly so. But just in terms of the money you need to run a football club, she's just been overtaken by events, dear boy, as the quote says, isn't it?
Yes, and football is now the plaything of the billionaire.
Yeah.
As far as the elite end of the game is concerned, and even at the lower leagues, you do need to have an awful lot of money, unless you are going to be a fan-owned club.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page and everyone who has now joined the brand new Price of Football Club. If you'd like to join that club too and get ad-free listening, an invite to our monthly Q&A sessions, bonus episodes and more, go to our website, priceoffootball.com. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. I'll explain. Don't forget, you can follow us on X and you can find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to buy one of our excellent books or even a Price of Football t-shirt, you can find all the details on our website, priceoffootball.com. I apologise for laughing. It's just that one of the many things the Baroness was telling me last night is that he sits there in the dark. He likes it dark. That's the Baroness just behind Kieran has just gone around the room switching on every light in the house. In what I can only describe, Kieran, as a determined fashion. I've never seen lights. I've never seen lights turned on and somebody daring you to turn lights off in that fashion before. Those lights are staying on, Kieran.
They are.
Yes. We'll be back on Tuesday with our regular questions pod. Until then, I'll hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary and very visible farewell.
Well, thank you as always to everybody who supports the show in such a myriad way, and also so many people turning up in Liverpool last night. We had a great time. The guests were fantastic, and I hope you enjoyed that as well. There's a variety of ways to support the show, and the Price of Football Club is one. If you don't want the adverts, if you want the bonus shows, but appreciate that times are tight for everybody. So there's another way that you can support the show, and that's to give us a review. It genuinely helps. It increases the profile from the algorithms that the likes of Apple and Spotify use, and we do benefit from that in terms of where we appear in the tables. It doesn't matter what you say as far as your review is concerned. So you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Sylvester Stallone and Sylvester the Cat. And I think that would be a fantastic mix of minds.
I love that cat. What an idiot, that cat. What an idiot. This is how I know I was my dad's son, because some of his irrational dislikes. He hated Tweety Pie. My dad lived
I'm glad he did. I hated Tweety Pie too.
My dad lived for the day. I almost had to write to Warner Brothers and say, how much would it cost for you to do an episode where he just grabs Tweety Pie out of the cage and eats him? It kept my dad going. He lived for the episode when that little, this is arrogant little. All right, calm down, Dad. Calm. But yeah, poor old Sylvester, suffering succotash. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.